Okay, well, let's move on to the next subject here. It's going to be a little hard to follow Dan. I won't be quite as flowery as he is and won't have the historical information in there for you, but it'll be a little bit more KS specific, and it'll be about concepts and things you've heard about before. My intention here is to kind of wrap up a few loose ends on a couple subjects like holds and exemptions, and to offer a couple summary comments on academic record, as well as just giving you a little bit of reference towards the services side of these things. So let's talk a little bit about holds. In review, a lot of this you will have seen in past sessions if you attended them, but really, what is a hold? It's really, it's an entity, it's an object, it's a thing that can be placed on the academic record, but as Carol said, it also kind of exists on its own, but we do have mention of it there in the academic record side of things. Why do we have holds? Well, pretty common sense, I think, to most of you that have been around the biz for a while. It's to prevent an activity that likely would occur without the hold. And an example there might be mandatory advising that would prevent you from registering. If you've got something that's key in your program or something going on in your progress to graduation that needs a stop on it, and you need to talk with your advisor first. That could also be something that doesn't actually stop you or block you, but it just warns. And that warning might be a condition that lets you know about something. A library hold might be an example of that, oh, by the way, we're not going to let you graduate, but we're going to let you keep registering along the way. Take care of this. And so holds might prevent a whole slew of things, but registration might be one. Obtaining official transcripts might be another. Might keep you from adding courses at a particular time. It might keep you from dropping courses. So how do holds get placed? Well, maybe most of us think of them as being done by a person, but they actually can happen triggered by some sort of condition and through an automatic process as well. But many of us will, again, go back to the manual way where an administrator decides that conditions are right, that this individual needs a hold. They also can come from an external system. Okay, Dan? So, when you place holds, obviously they don't stay forever, and some things will need to be removed. That normally is a manual process. In fact, I don't know that we've even thought about anything that might be an automated process for removing a hold, but I won't take out that possibility at this point. Typically a manual process. So oftentimes when you've got a group of holds that are in particular categories, there may be a group of administrators that actually manage that group or catalog or inventory. And those things have attributes such as name, description, is this enforced or is it a warning? Who's the contact person or responsible office? What's the effective dating? When does it start? Does the hold come off at some point, or is it open-ended? As you might expect, there are already some kind of foundational pieces in KS that have some typing for holds. It could be medical, financial, advising, or other types. But we're still kind of working through what the states might be of a hold. Again, not too cosmic, but those things are there. Obviously, there are permissions or excuse me, roles and qualifiers that will allow you to be able to place holds, remove holds, view holds, that sort of a thing. I did include a link to the hold service because there is such an entity in KS right now. We won't talk about the details of the hold service, but that's how holds are handled by employing the service. So questions on holds before we move on to exemptions? Okay, hearing none. Exemptions. Well, obviously an exemption is, what it is really is something that allows an activity when a condition exists that would have otherwise prevented that. Again, it's an entity, an object, a thing. Could be on the academic record. An exemption is always granted to a person. And what it's really allowing is kind of the condition to be passed through, or the restriction or the rule that was causing the block to be passed through. Typically, we think of an exemption as being persistent. In other words, it lasts for some period of time. But oftentimes people will use the other word, override, to mean kind of a temporary or a one-time type of exemption. You may hear both of those terms. Where do exemptions originate? How do they start? Where do they come from? Well, somebody has to request one. So in the services, there are provisions made for making an exemption request. They don't necessarily have to come from students. They could come from administrators or advisors on a student's behalf, but they come from a person. Next one, please, Dan. So these requests are going to be typical things that you might consider pretty common sense. Name, description, what is the condition that's being exempted, who's the requester, who is actually approving this thing, and again, effective dating. And I see it's so nice, we have it twice. So think about some examples about the kinds of things that might be exempted here. And common typical things we would see are any of the requisites, anti-requisites, prereqs, co-reqs, program-based restrictions. You may have other ones that are based upon your school or your major or your minor, that sort of thing. Or restrictions based upon your class standing or your year in school. Likewise, so requests in the service area do have types and do have states. They're kind of under development at this point and in their infancy stage, kind of referring back to Dan's baby picture there as well. So I've also put in a link to the exemption service because, again, exemptions are handled via service operations again. Okay, on to the next, Dan. And the next.
It's funny, it's like a 10-second delay, so I'm trying to predict you.
Yeah, I think you're doing wonderfully. Thanks. So again, typical things. Dan has covered many of these, but in sort of wrap-up fashion here, again, academic record, there's what you might consider typical creation of records, or retrieval, modifying them or deleting them, but kind of the more unusual ones. He touched on many of these. We know that there are needs to create manuals, records manually outside of that process, especially if it's going to be a historical record of some sort. We know, as Dan showed, even back to the very old type academic records, sometimes learning results do get modified. They need to be changed, and that has to happen. Sometimes degrees or credentials or awards get added on manually, or they actually get revoked because something happened that made it no longer appropriate. We also know that, well, maybe your systems don't have this, but ours certainly does. From time to time, you have what look like duplicate records, and you need to merge things between people that have gotten in under appearing to be different identities. So merging records is another thing that's common. Okay, Dan? So again, in summary, kind of some traditional things here that are contained in the academic record. Native course and program offerings. Dan did a good job, I think, of getting into transfer credit and distinguishing between raw and evaluated course information. We've got lots of different types of calculations, be they GPAs and credits, and Dan had a nice slide on that. Obviously, different types of awards, credentials, certificates, degrees, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Performance recognition. Dan did mention Dean's List, different types of honors, class ranking, that kind of thing, as well as relationship with your program. Are you in good standing? Oh, are you in trouble? Do you need to have a hold place because you're on probation status? Do you need reinstatement? Same thing with the institution. Do you have good standing there? Are you separated on, are you on a leave of absence? Have you had any disciplinary actions taken against you? Have you petitioned for one reason or another? That's other type of information that might be on the academic record. Next one, please, Dan. So, things as I think you did a pretty good job on about talking that might not be actually in the entity called the academic record, but they're going to be somewhere. Student person information certainly is there, and there are some examples that you see there that you would normally equate to things that go along with a student. Other types of strictly academic information may be held elsewhere as well, for the athletic codes, housing things about your student health status. Financial aid information may or may not be on your current systems. In KS, most likely they'll be in an external system, but future releases will determine that and the details. Next, please, Dan. So let's talk a little bit about services. There are some kind of embryonic services for academic record. They were mostly created to be the basic underpinnings for course slice development, and they really have to do about just native courses and learning results, GPAs, credits, that sort of thing right now. So very much a work in progress. Likewise, their types and states are pretty much in their infancy. But I also included a link to the academic record service there for those who might want to go look. Again, I expect parallel development to be working on building those out as when the right time comes there. So, as I said, my part was a little bit less lengthy than Dan's. We've got time for questions on those kind of cross-cutting concepts before we move on to Carol's wrap-up. Any questions there?
Okay, sorry, talking away. So this concludes Module 5. We have plenty of time for questions. Looks like we have 2.5 hours for questions. So we'll do the follow-up. Again, just a reminder that these modules are meant to facilitate self-study of the materials that we have out there, and you can find all the materials related to the 3 topics of academic record holds and exemptions on the wiki page for the training. We'll have a follow-up to answer any questions that came out of this session and any of the intervening self-study that you might do over the next week. We'll have a follow-up session next Thursday, 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific. Questions in the Google Doc that we've been using for this training. And then the last of our trainings will be on February 8th, and it will be Understanding Academic Planning. So, and then we'll talk a little bit about KS, how it's handling academic planning, which is admittedly pretty minimally in Enrollment 1.0, but we will have an update on the contribution of my plan that the UW is working on. So that one it's very unlikely that one will go 4 hours. I would think we probably can plan on about 2 to 2.5 for that. Anyway, that's all we had for today. I don't have the assessment, or the evaluation rather, for this session posted here in the slides, but it is on the wiki page, so you can get to the evaluation of this session from the training page, the wiki page, and I would encourage all of you to please fill out that assessment. We're getting just 1 and 2 people evaluating these sessions, so it's kind of hard to make an overall judgment about their effectiveness without a little bit more data, so I would appreciate your taking the time to do those. Any questions about the material, or?
I'll ask a question just to carry on the conversation. I was looking in the academic record detailed requirements and noticed that the listing of the academic record doesn't appear to allow for grouping of what students have taken their courses associated with degrees or associated with programs. It seems from what's described here as it's just going to be sort of chronological. I assume that's not the case, but I figured I'd ask.
I'm not sure when you say group according to programs, you mean like when being able to sort and say as this major, you know.
First I did an engineering degree, and so here's the chronological sequence of events for that. And then separately, I did an arts and science degree, and here's the chronological record of things that happened for that. So it's sorting or grouping my academic history by what degree it was associated with, rather than just a an inline chronological listing, because there might have been some overlap. I may have started my arts and science degree before I finished my engineering degree.
That is not a feature we have currently identified.
Right.
And yet, in many ways, it does just seem like a configurable view that institutions would do differently.
I think it kind of gets out a little bit, and depending on your program to course structure. I mean, I think if you have that prospective view that this particular course I'm taking to apply to this specific degree, rather than I'm going to take courses and then I'm going to figure out through the degree audit process which degree. I mean, one could make a pretty logical conclusion that if you're taking, a particular art course and you are both, and you're in an art major, that you're probably taking it for that rather than the engineering degree you might also be finishing up. But unless there's, I think this goes back earlier to the question of handling these like dual degrees, sounds like there might be some need for tagging specific courses to be associated with programs of study. I guess a lot of institutions just aren't that prescriptive. It's the student takes courses and then applies them to the program requirements rather than tagging specific courses as being part of that program. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we had that kind of feature identified in the program audit, aka degree audit requirements, where, when I think about, even Maryland has, must be 16 unique credits between dual programs, that kind of stuff. That's all was fashioned as degree audit functionality to be able to identify what's being utilized and how and in which way. I don't know if we've done much to say how that would then, how you might expose that type of evaluation outcome through the means of a view of the record or something like that. But,
right.
But it's more than just how it's presented in the academic record. It's also about, if I'm taking a course towards this degree, then the rules of the faculty that offers that degree define how I can, things like drop dates and add dates and stuff. All the different administrivia things depend on for which degree I'm taking this course.
That wasn't me.
Yeah, I don't
moving. Oh, you're breaking up. I don't know. No, I absolutely get what you're saying. I think what you're getting at is the coupling between what a student, which sounds pretty obvious and self-evident, but obviously there has to be a relationship between the courses a student enrolls in and the program that they're taking. It's just whether that relationship is built prospectively, so that you can identify, like, I'm actually taking this course for this program, building in that relationship prospectively, as opposed to sort of retrospectively saying, okay, I've taken a bunch of stuff, I'm in this major, which apply to what? I think building that relationship, it's really more, I think, a program offering and a program enrollment issue that we'll have to deal with. And frankly, I don't think we have great answers, but I understand the need that you're getting at. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Carol, this is Mike at the postgraduate school.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Mike.
Wanted to chime in there. I guess the terms I'm sort of listening for are concurrent enrollments and successive enrollments. And being a graduate institute only, we're a little bit different than the rest of the world, but we do see repeat students who might enroll in master's program A. A couple of years later, enroll in a distance learning master's program B, and at the same time concurrently enroll in a graduate certificate program C. And a couple of years later, then start their PhD. And this has bedeviled our own student system, trying to keep a logical track of student history and allocate the right things to the right time periods. And this is a little bit different concept than what some registrars think of as careers, although I suppose you could say master's to PhD are two distinct careers. We do see a lot of student records where within the master's realm, maybe 2 masters plus a certificate or 2 could be earned over time. And so I guess the concept is concurrent enrollments and successive enrollments, and how Kuali student will treat that, and how it will be able to be logically rendered on the transcript.
Those are excellent points, and frankly, I think we know generally that's an issue. I don't think we have any. I don't know that we have any specific design decisions around that. But it's an excellent point. It's noted. I guess I've tended to think about that more in the realm of program audit, i.e., how an audit will consume the courses that a student has taken, so it plops it in the right bucket and gives the student credit for the correct degree. But I understand, I'm seeing just with these a couple of questions that it really highlights the need to also track that more obviously in the academic record itself. It's not just a question of consumption, it's actually a question of recording it appropriately as well. Like having concurrent majors, there are a lot of rules built into degree audit. You can't double dip, right? You can't apply to the same course potentially to do different degree programs, for instance. And I think we've tended to think about that more in the realm of program audit, but I definitely see what both you and our friends from Toronto are raising. So.
Might be some academic planning aspects too. I mean, especially when you put that graduate lens on it. So much of graduate programs deal with that plan, the academic plan that graduate students do, where they get approvals for the courses they're going to plan to use towards their master's program, which the planning module really would have a lot of that, or the feature would have a lot of that aspect to it in terms of figuring out, okay, that one course you're using towards your forensics degree, not towards your fine arts and English degree. That's usually documented there through those documents. Worth thinking about.
Program course interaction is something that we know we have to handle, and we just haven't done a lot of very detailed work in that area, I should say.
Well, this is Mike again. I'd be happy to talk offline with others who have an interest in successive and concurrent enrollments, particularly those who might do graduate certificates at the same time they're awarding master's degrees, because in that case we do allow some double dipping where you can earn your graduate certificates along the way, incidentally, towards your master's degree. And that's just one example where we do allow a course to double dip for the certificate and the degree.
And is that a function of your degree audit processes, or is that a function of how you record it on the academic record, or both?
Both.
Both, okay.
And our audit processes are human manual.
Okay. All right, so you have to record it on the record. Okay, all right, well, that's helpful. Yeah, I think having some very specific use cases will be quite helpful. Does anybody, any other analysis team members have anything they want to add to that? Make us look like we've actually thought about this a little bit more?
Well, we have thought about it. We have thought about multiple active programs at the same time and splitting up courses into GPAs. There are requirements listed in the academic record section about automatically assigning them based on rules and allowing manual assignments and reassociations of it.
Thanks, Steve. You always make me look better.
Carol, this is Mike again. This is a real change of subject, but as I viewed the presentation today, there was only a moment or two where I could see who all the attendees were. Most of my screen has been full screen presentation, and I don't seem to have any controls that allow me to shift modes, and I wonder if that's something you all are driving at your end. Previously, we've seen a display where on one pane on the left or right we can see who the attendees are and raise hands for questions and things.
Yeah, now I don't know if it's just a function that I'm hosting, but I'm able to get out of full screen mode on my end, even though I'm not actually sharing the screen. There should be a toggle. So if you see in your, for those of you who would like a little Adobe tutorial, if on your top bar, do you see a full screen button?
That might have been me, sorry.
Okay, no, and then just to the right of that, there should be like a little drop-down menu. And if you just unclick, hopefully you see the attendees. Do you see that now? Does that help?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to have the chat present, too.
I got another question if you're up for it.
Sure.
U of T, Dan Pettigrew again. So this concept of different degrees, and scoping also applies to transfer credits, and so I'm wondering about that as well. It's not, here at U of T, it's not an institutional decision as to what transfer credit you get for something. It's, well, in the context of this program or this degree, we're going to give you this credit for this, but a different degree that you might be pursuing would give you different transfer credits for those same courses, perhaps.
Yeah, okay, so that I understand that. I think that it sounds like more who does the evaluation and grants the credit. It's a little bit more decentralized then, or is it still centralized but it depends on program? I mean, is it still the same office doing it and they look at what a student's major is, or do you actually push that out to the departments for them to make their own assessments?
Entirely decentralized, as with everything else at U of T.
There's no reason the way we're thinking about it can't do that. It's just going to be, I think, more the devil in the details about authorizations and then what happens if a student then changes major. Does that whole transfer credit evaluation process get wiped clean and redone in the context of their new major?
No, they would have a new section of their academic record that pertains to the new program. The old answers for the old degree are still valid, but now there's a new context in which to consider it in addition to the old context, which remains.
Got it. The work that we've done thus far on transfer credit, I don't see any reason why we can't accommodate that model. I think it'll just be a question of how far we build that out in terms of being able to push it out to departments. I don't know, Steve and Dan, do you guys have any additional thoughts? I don't see anything that would prevent them from doing that, to have more unique.
I think it's in there. I think this is a good example of a very specific way in which one might do it. That I think it gets into that entire transfer credit functionality, because we've just spent a lot of time talking about that split of, we recognize you're keeping that full repository of all that transfer data, and that you may, at different points in time, decide to apply specific courses out of that repository to the academic record. That's pretty well documented in terms of the big picture perspective. But looking at it one layer further in terms of specificity to say that, oh, but in the perspective of one program, you only have 10 transfer credits, but in the perspective of program 2, you have 58 transfer credits. I don't think we've banged against that layer yet. I think we're, that creates some issues you've got to play with. Does that count towards your credits? If we think you a freshman, sophomore progression with the institution, which program are we looking at? Is there a stable central one? Is it program specific? It's good stuff for us to play with.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a really nice place to highlight the difference between design and implementation. There's nothing in the design that would prevent that implementation, but whether we implement it in that fashion or not, for the reference implementation, we probably, that's a question mark. I mean, the basic design will support doing that. It's just building it out so the application allows the end user to do that is a different question. Because it's basically the same process. Taking the credit, storing it, and then deciding how you want to allocate credit. And it's just you guys have an extra layer of looking at the specific program, at a specific point in time and letting someone in the department or decentralized do that. So now you're getting into authorizations and you're getting into, multiple interpretations of transfer credit. There's nothing in the design that would prevent that from happening, but, that might be more implementation work on your end than really fundamental design, if that distinction makes sense.
Carol, actually, we have thought about this because the way USC does its transfer credit evaluation is lower division work is done centrally and all upper division work is done at the department level of the major. So it sounds like what they're describing is all of theirs are done the way we do upper division. So we have planned to accommodate that.
I pay attention at our meetings. I swear I do. It's just everybody has a slightly different way of doing it. I think really as a project, about the most we've talked about is sort of centralized, but
just to clarify,
that's a great point. Yeah.
Just to clarify, the question that I was thinking of was not more about who does it, although that is a factor, but that it's not the answer. It's not the academic record. It's it's the record pertaining to that program and their interpretation with respect to that program. But I think you got that, so that's great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, those are good, really good questions. Really good questions. I mean, I think what it highlights is really hard to talk about academic record without talking about every other aspect of the enrollment module, because you didn't necessarily get into questions of degree audit and program enrollment and program assessment, and so they're all very intertwined. So I think hopefully our thinking about the academic record and how we consume it and what we store on it will evolve along with the application. Excellent questions. Great. So we will be available next Thursday for additional questions, and maybe we can help clarify some of the things that came up today. And unless there's other burning questions, we'll say good day. Good day. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, Dan, and here.
Right,
great job. Bye.